Good evening, everyone. I am Councillor Andrew Davenport, Mayor of the City of Whitehorse, and I welcome you tonight to the Ordinary Council meeting. I would like to remind councillors that the meeting, other than the confidential meeting, is being recorded and the audio recording made available publicly on our council website tomorrow. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate and decision making and encouraging openness and transparency. However, council accepts no liability for any individual opinions or statements. So also please note tonight, councillors, there's a number of cameras in the different parts of the chamber. And the reason that they're there is because tonight we have initiated webcasting, which will allow streaming and recording of council meetings. For this evening, we are pilot testing the equipment, and the recorded footage will not be live, nor it will be available for public viewing afterwards. And the purpose is to test all webcast equipment so that future live streaming and recording of council meetings can take place. It is anticipated that all formal public committee and council meetings in the near future will be made live, recorded except for the confidential meetings, and uploaded onto the council's website within 48 hours after the council meeting occurring. All care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, people in the gallery should note that your presence may be recorded. By remaining in the public gallery, it's understood that we have your consent for your image if your image is inadvertently broadcast, and if you do not agree, you're welcome to leave the meeting. Councillors and officers, please ensure that your microphones are on when speaking. So I now would like to formally open this council meeting and ask you all to stand for the opening prayer and statement. We give thanks, O God, for the men and women of the past whose generous devotion to the common good has been the making of our city. Grant that our own generation may build worthily on the foundations they have laid. Direct our minds that all we plan and determine is for the well-being of the city. Amen. In the spirit of reconciliation, Whitehorse City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri people as the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on. We pay our respects to the elders, past and present. Please be seated. I would like to now introduce our councillors and senior officers here this evening. Councillors on my left, Councillor Bill Bennett.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
Councillor Blair Barker.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Councillor Tina Liu.
Good evening, everyone. Great to see you all.
Councillor Sharon Ellis.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
Councillors on my right, Councillor Prue Cutts.
Yes, good evening, everyone, and welcome particularly to Deakin University students.
Councillor Ben Stennett.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to everyone, particularly the venturers here from Tally Ho Scout Group.
Councillor Denise Massoud.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to see such a full gallery. If I didn't know better, I think we were going to have a party almost with so many people here. Really good to see you.
Councillor Andrew Munro.
Good evening and welcome to all our observers from Deakin and the Scouts tonight, or venturers.
Staff on my left, Chief Executive Officer Miss Nolene Duff.
Good evening.
General Manager Infrastructure Mr Nigel Brown.
Good evening.
General Manager Corporate Services Mr Peter Smith.
Good evening.
Staff on my right, Executive Manager Governance and Customer Service Mr Tony DeFazio.
Good evening, everyone.
Team Leader Governance Miss Jenny Russell.
Good evening, everyone.
General Manager City Development Mr Jeff Green.
Good evening.
General Manager Human Services Miss Terry Wilkinson.
Good evening.
In the gallery, Manager Communications Miss Sally Freud. Now I'd like to move on to item number 2, apologies. So we have already an apology for Councillor Carr for the 20th of August meeting and Councillor Ellis for the 17th of September meeting. And because they've been already granted, there's no Okay, so I'll start again. We've already received the apology from Councillor Carr for tonight's meeting, and that's already been granted. So we only need a motion now to accept Councillor Ellis's leave of absence for the ordinary council meeting held on the 17th of September. So I seek a mover.
So moved, Mayor.
Councillor Bennett moved, seconded.
Happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts seconded. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Move to item number 3 on the agenda, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Councillors and officers, are there any disclosures of conflicts of interest in regards to matters to be considered on tonight's agenda? If so, I will require a disclosure of that interest and nature of that interest. There being none, I'll move on to item number 4, confirmation of minutes. Councillors, we have listed on the agenda the minutes from our last meeting requiring confirmation by council. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 16th of July 2018?
So moved.
Councillor Munro moved, a seconder. Councillor Bennett seconded. Is there any discussion? Not, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item number 5 on the agenda, responses to questions. Council provides the opportunity for anyone present in the gallery to submit a question on the in writing on the forms provided on the forms provided in accordance with Clause 18 of our meeting procedure local law, for which we will endeavour to provide a response. I will ask the Chief Executive Officer whether there are any questions submitted.
There are no questions this evening, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll now move on to item number 6, which is notices of motion. We do have one, but that's been noted as confidential, so that will be treated separately on the agenda. Therefore, we'll move to item number 7, petitions. Councillors, do we have any petitions to be tabled this evening? There being none, item number 8, urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business to consider this evening? Yeah. No, I'll move to item number 9. Council reports. Councillors, we have a number of reports to consider tonight listed under City Development, Infrastructure and Corporate. I will introduce each report in the order listed and then call for a motion with regards to the item. Item 9.1.1, 203 Canterbury Road, Blackburn.
Mayor, I have an alternate.
Okay,
The alternate is
Councillor
for a
Masood
refusal.
has an alternate. Can that be displayed on the screen, please?
For a refusal, thank you.
So for a refusal, I'm going to ask, is there a seconder for that motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts seconded. There being a mover and a seconder, I will now go to Councillor Masood for her moving speech.
Thank you, Mayor. The site at 203 Canterbury Road is only 2 doors from 199, which twice council have gone to VCAT, where there was a development proposed at 199 with a site coverage of 35%. Now, this particular proposal is proposing 37% coverage plus a 21% hard surface coverage. One of the things that we need to look at is that the community went and fought very hard for 199 and actually were supported twice at VCAT, and they were supported on the basis of the SLO2 requirements in terms of vegetation, etc. And the importance that we do uphold the, I suppose, the criteria, the things that we value and our community values in Whitehorse, I believe, to make sure that we can maintain our tree canopy. The motion says that the proposed plan fails in relation to the protection and conservation of areas with identified landscape values. Also, it fails to contribute positively to the local urban design and character, and there are a number of other items listed there. I'd like to quote from a judgment at VCAT, which was published in May this year for 199 Canterbury Road, to show what the VCAT member felt about the application for 199 and how we should be looking after this environment. The comments were that the footprint and extent of hard pavement fails to respond acceptably to the area's landscape character. I agree with the submissions that the proposal is too large and too intensive for the site. As I said just before, that was a proposal for 35% footprint coverage. This proposal is for 37%, so the member clearly understood the impact of that. Another comment was, it presents as a large expanse of hard surface which is inconsistent with the policy direction aimed at achieving garden settings. Also, it does not result in a reasonable proportion of the site being available for planting, landscaping and open space. To the contrary, building and paved areas dominate the property. In our planning scheme, the vegetation should be dominant and the buildings subservient to the vegetation. So we have to look at the fact that twice we've gone to VCAT and the community have fought this and they've had success. And the two different members, two different times, have acknowledged the importance of this area within Whitehorse and the importance of SLO2 and how we should be upholding the standards that the community demand of us. There are a number of other comments here, but they do say they are not satisfied the proposed landscaping response will achieve the landscape and vegetated outcome sought for this location. This particular application from the developer is proposing to put a canopy tree, which can go to about 15 metres high, right in between two buildings where it won't be able to achieve its maximum height, it won't be able to achieve its maximum canopy. That's on the western boundary. In fact, it's right on the fence line, so it'll be half in one property and half in another, and it'll be hitting the buildings before it ever gets up to mature height, etc. And also with the hard surface, it won't have adequate space for it to really achieve its maximum height. And there have been submissions, and I know we've all received emails, the Tree Preservation Society has sent some information around, that the planting is not possible on this site to achieve the outcomes of the SLO2. Given the success we've had at VCAT about protecting the importance of the vegetation, I ask that you consider and support this refusal. The community are absolutely passionate. They've recently been out on National Tree Planting Days. Everybody is very much focused on how important it is. Later on tonight we have the strategy for our council spaces, I guess, for trees, and we'll again review vegetation. But I'd ask you to consider this as a refusal given our past success at VCAT in standing up for this area, which is particularly sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Masood. Before I call the seconder, I noticed two members of the gallery sort of sitting out where the glass is, and they're invited to sit in the front row if they'd like, if I could ask if they wanted to sit in. Welcome. And thank you. Thank you, councillors, for allowing a brief break. Now I will call on Councillor Cutts for for the seconding part of the motion speech. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, 203 Canterbury Road in Blackburn is part of the area in Blackburn's most protected area, making significant contributions to the biolinks in the area. It's a neighbourhood residential zone 1 and it's an SLO2, which is a significant landscape overlay number 2 specific to that area. It's also a bush suburban precinct with minimal change. And what that means is that the dominant feature looking at the site should be the bush. And and subservient to that should be the built form. So currently there is a detached single dwelling, a brick building on the site. It's a large site of 1,845 square metres, but there's one building there, which is fairly similar across the region. It's actually very near to Blackburn Road. And in actual fact, when I went and visited today, mind you, I've driven past, like many of us here, many, probably hundreds of times, but I did go past today and actually have a look at the site. I turned around the corner and I saw a sign which said Blackburn Significant Landscape Area. So that is what it is. It's actually got a sign there as such. And what we should see in these significant landscape areas, number 2, is that the built form, as I said, should be subservient to the bush. Now, with this particular development of 4 dwellings, with each of 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, a large print built form on the particular block there, and that is really, I believe, an overdevelopment of the site, particularly given its particular SLO2 category. There's also, as Councillor Massoud has indicated, an inadequate space for the revegetation. And as has happened over the past few years, there have been numbers of protected trees which have been removed, and there's been lopping of other trees as well. So as far as this area is concerned, I believe this is an overdevelopment. It backs onto the Masons Road retarding basin at the back. And if you go along there, you'll see that there's beautiful trees there, and this is not actually reflecting that in this particular development. So councillors, really, that's probably all I wish to say with regards to that. So thank you very much, Mayor.
Call for a speaker against the motion. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually not totally against what my ward colleague, Councillor Massoud, has said tonight. But councillors, what I'd like to do is foreshadow another alternate should this refusal not get up, and that is a reduction on the dwellings and the hard surface areas as opposed to what's in the report. Councillors, you will have, many of you will have received emails in recent days from residents concerned about this site, and I understand the history of the adjoining site. But I think what we need to understand is what are the planning facts in relation to this site. 33% site coverage and 17% of the dwellings and 17% hard surface area are planning permit triggers in the SLO. They are not rules that we are bound to in terms of what the zoning allows. The zoning allows on this site up to 40% building coverage and up to 20% hard surface area. What I'd like to propose in the alternate, should this motion not get up, is a building coverage of 34% on the site and 19% on the hard surface areas. And that is achievable, and the alternate that should this motion not get up will actually go into the detail as how that is to be achieved. And those values are much lower than what the zoning allows and only marginally above what the trigger for SLO2 is. I think it's also important to understand that 199 was for a childcare centre with different vegetation issues on the site, and as councillors would know, every site has different planning considerations that we have to take into account. But of course, the site, and particularly for the childcare centre, in particular road access to Canterbury Road was a particular issue. I do note that this land is SLO2, but the land also abuts a Vic Roads Category 1 road, and my concern is that in time the zoning may become different on the site and may allow for a more intense development. And I note and I know that residents have brought to our attention that a number of the other sites are perhaps up for development in the near future. In conclusion, at 1,845 square metres, councillors would be aware that we often get applications for 4 townhouses on blocks about half that site. So what is before us in the report is actually a significant reduction on what exists in other parts of the municipality. And I know it's cognizant of the SLO, and that is the point. So, councillors, I'd actually urge you to vote against the refusal, because I think our ability to reject 4 townhouses on a site of such size is probably limited. The childcare centre gives us an insight, but these are not precedents set at VCAT. So, councillors, I encourage you to vote against and support the alternate.
Seek a speaker in favour of the motion. Councillor Bennett.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, certainly we'd all hope that there's not a change to the zoning requirements along Canterbury Road. We know there's been enough overdevelopment along major thoroughfares in our municipality, along Whitehorse Road and along Burwood Highway. I would hate to think that this current neighbourhood residential zone would be zoned residential growth zone or anything that would allow more development. Councillors, this is a bush suburban area, limited change. By having a dominant building on this site is just counter to what we're trying to achieve in our municipality as far as the bush suburban nature is concerned. I remind councillors that later on tonight we'll be talking about the urban forest strategy and our objective to achieve at least a 30% canopy cover by 2030. Currently we're around 22 to 26%. If we can't enhance the canopy coverage, or at least maintain it in these areas, we'll never achieve this 30% objective by 2030. So councillors, support this rejection because we need to continue to maintain and protect our bush suburban areas in this municipality. Thank you.
Seek a speaker in against the motion.
Mayor.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, Mayor, I'm very concerned that the subtext of this debate seems to be reduced to either you're a tree hugger and against development or you're an environmental vandal. Now, you know, trees by their very nature are indeed renewable, Mr Mayor. And whilst I fully understand what Councillor Bennett says about the urban forest strategy, I'm a huge supporter of it and I love trees. I've got massive trees on my own property, and I know how valuable they are. But this is private property, Mayor. This is a block of 1,800 plus square metres, and we're looking at putting 4 residences on it. And I'd ask councillors to consider that not everyone, in fact, there'd be probably 0.5% of the population that can afford to buy nearly a 2,000 square metre block in Blackburn that's covered in trees and can't be developed. Not everyone's got the millions of dollars that clearly councillors have got here and have got an interest in denying people the ability to use their private property as they see. The conditions that officers have put here are very, very thorough, Mr Mayor. Let's take a look at a few of them. The mahogany gums that are going to be removed are in poor condition and poor health. I've got experience with them, Mayor. When they get to 35 years old, they become really dangerous. Now, if you've got children or animals or livestock or other buildings nearby, they are very dangerous. They do regrow. They regrow massively and quickly in this country, but they do have a limited lifespan. Let's look at the discussion that Councillor Masood led around the hard surfaces, as if these are the sort of the end of the world, pretending it's going to be some sort of concrete jungle. Well, Mr Mayor, that's nonsense, and I take your conditions 6A, B and C. These are hard surfaces, but they're that permeable material that particularly they use in the city of Melbourne around the street trees there, so the rain actually penetrates through it, but you can still walk on it without getting muddy boots. So whilst they may be hard surfaces, they're completely penetrable, so that the tree canopy in the forest there can continue to thrive. There's pages and pages of conditions here that add cost and cost and cost onto the developer, and most importantly, onto the people that want to join you in the significant landscape overlay because they're attracted to it, and the developer wants to make extra homes for decent Australian working families that also want to live in this forested area. Screw piles, the tree protection zones. Again, you know, Mr Munro points out that the proposal is for 37% of the land to be developed. I mean, they can go to 40. The applicant is proposing to plant 44 trees. 44 trees, Mayor. They're spending, what, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 on landscaping, so it will be better than the landscaping's there at the moment. Councillors, this is important. Reject this rejection.
Speakers in favour of the motion? Any further speakers against the motion? Councillor
Mayor.
Liu.
Thank you. Look, I do commend Councillor Masood and Councillor Cutz's argument regarding the SLO2 and preserving the tree canopy and the greenery of this particular site and its surrounds. I think that Councillor Munro makes a really interesting point in that in terms of this particular application, as it currently stands, it does meet planning policies. And another interesting note is in regards to the size of this land, and it is quite a significant land size, and it's looking at 4 dwellings. I mean, with each of our wards, we've experienced and come across similar applications and more units built on smaller pieces of land that VCAT has upheld when challenged at VCAT. So I think these are certain considerations certainly need to be had. Another point which Councillor Barker raised is in regards to the landscaping plan, which really looks at planting more trees onto the site. Yes, there will be some trees that will be lost, but they will be replaced. So I would be certainly quite interested to hear the alternate should this refusal not pass. Thank you.
Are there any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Stennett.
Mayor, thank you. I wasn't going to speak, but I support this refusal. I think possibly not surprising that councillors from the other end of town in Box Hill are speaking against this because they don't have any bushland. They don't understand what bushland is in Blackburn and Nuttawading.
Oh, point of order, Mayor.
Okay, point of order has been called. Councillor Barker, please state the nature of the point of order.
Well, it's relevance and it's defamatory about the great former city of Box Hill, Mr. Mayor. We're what gave the city of Whitehorse its green leafy suburbs, Churchill Street, Margaret Street, and we've got Councillor Bennett pretending that it's some sort of nuclear wasteland. It's offensive.
Councillor Barker, when you call a point of order, just briefly state the nature and you've given that point. I'll ask Councillor Stennett to please continue.
So thank you, Mayor. Well, Box Hill doesn't have bushland. It does have green open spaces. There is the Box
Point
Hill
of order,
Gardens, and
Mayor.
there is,
Further
of course,
point of order has been called. Councillor Liu.
With all due respect, Box Hill has nothing to do with this application. Thank you.
I remind Councillor Stennett that there is a section of the meeting procedure that you need to contain your comments to the motion at hand, so I'd ask you to do that. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Further point of order from Councillor Munro.
I'd ask for Councillor Stennett to withdraw the remarks because the other ward councillor has actually spoken against the refusal.
So Councillor Munro has sought a withdrawal of a remark. I'm not going to go down that path in this occasion, but Councillor Stennett, please continue noting the comments that have been made by your fellow councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll say again, the refusal makes perfect sense. It's makes a complete mockery and sham of our significant landscape overlays, and the fact that we are saying to people that we value the amenity that this bushland environment provides, and our residents are asking us to represent them, to actually advocate to the state government, to actually refuse applications like this because it doesn't respect the bushland environment.
Are there any further speakers against the motion? Any further speakers in favour of the motion? I'm going to give Councillor Masood the right of reply.
Thank you, Mayor. yes, planning permit triggers. However, trees are not so easily renewed. 50 years, possibly, to get to their full height. This development is for 4 townhouses, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, plus powder room. They're quite significant sizes. You are in an SLO2, so the comparison where you've got under 300 square metres, maybe 250, where you've got a small townhouse in an area without trees, is not comparable. And you cannot draw that comparison. This is an SLO2 environment, and for interest, perhaps the Tree Preservation Society highlighted that at the front of the development, they're wanting to put 6 trees, and that includes 4 canopy trees and 2 further ones to achieve 10 metres high. But the actual land size is not enough to support them. The landscape plan is not consistent with what it needs to establish. And that is the issue with this development, that the open spaces on the site after the development will not support the amount of trees. So it's all very easy to see it written on paper in black and white and think, oh, well, there's going to be that many trees. But open your eyes a bit more, look at the science of what's required, and you will realise there is not enough space for the trees. And therefore, you need to look a little bit more deeply and not just at the surface. Hard surfaces, by the way, are not the permeable surfaces, okay? Sometimes the hard surfaces are the solid concrete driveways. Let's not confuse that. This is an overdevelopment for the site, given it does not allow the plantings that are required in SLO2. The community are passionate across Whitehorse. We get emails from all parts of Whitehorse about the importance of our trees and how precious they are to people. We need to protect them, and we need to protect it in this area. It is a sensitive area. We've had 2 supporting judgments at VCAT. Let's refuse this application, councillors. Thank you.
Councillors, I'm going to put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those against?
Division.
Motion's lost. Division's been called. Those in favour? Sorry, the motion was carried, so I'm going to go to the division. Councillor Ellis, Councillor Bennett, Councillor Cutts, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Masood. Those against? Councillor Munro, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Barker, Councillor Liu. The motion is carried. 9.1.2 Student Accommodation Policy Review.
I have an alternate recommendation.
An alternate from Councillor Ellis. Can the alternate please be put on the screen? Councillor Ellis, can you briefly describe for the people that listen to the audio recording what the alternate's about? Councillor Ellis, can you please turn on your microphone? Thank you.
I turned it off, sorry. Basically, this is in respect of the car parking ratios, and I am seeking to increase them across the board from what is recommended in the initial report. That's the only change I'm making to the report.
Is there a seconder for the alternate?
Happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Liu. Councillor Ellis, your moving speech, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. About a decade ago, the first student accommodation policy was developed. That was in response mainly from the Riversdale Ward councillors, of which I'm one, in response to the residents surrounding the Deakin accommodation site, and they were concerned with a number of issues: the standard of the accommodation, the garbage, the facilities that may not be good for the students. But the one recurring theme was parking. It was parking and parking. And there were a series of planning forums that were conducted over that time before this was put in, the initial one was put in place. And that was the basis for the objectives almost every time, the parking. Now, the argument went 10 years ago, students don't have cars. And that's what every applicant said. Students do not have cars, therefore we don't need to provide on-site parking. Students do not have cars. And as a result of that, we end up with our side streets being filled to capacity by the students that actually did have cars, let alone their visitors that were coming. Now, this new study has shone a little bit of light onto the situation, and after interviewing the students, it turns out they actually do have cars, to the point of 0.48 for students at Box Hill Institute, and 0.45 for students at Deakin University. So they certainly have cars. And the argument is, where do those cars go if there's no provision on the site of the accommodation? The answer is in the side streets, where the residents are, where the residents expect to be able to park or the visitors park, and where there's parking controls now as a result. So this is to make a more realistic level of spaces. I know that the argument has been in the report that in line with Whitehorse policies, we should be encouraging better use of our public transport system. Well, that'd be great, but we've got a radial system in Victoria, where to get to places away from where you are could take several hours. And the fact that students may have visitors from other parts of town, that they will invariably visit with cars. The reality is, yes, there's a tram line along Burwood Highway. That's terrific if you want to go to Camberwell or you want to go straight to the city and you've got nearly an hour to spend on the tram. But if you happen to be working a part-time job as a student in Clayton or in, heavens forbid, Rowville, which has got no public transport, how do you get there? If you have an ageing parent or grandparent in Cranbourne, how do you get there? The other thing that's often overlooked is these students, it's assumed that they're international students that are staying in these accommodation, but the reality is there's country students too, and they will have a car because they go home of a weekend to visit, or they catch up with family members across Victoria or Melbourne generally. The reality is students do have cars. 0.45 for Deakin students and 0.48 for Box Hill students. And we need to make sure there's roughly adequate spaces there. I'm not suggesting that we have 4.45 or 0.45 and 0.48 at the respective places, but certainly increasing it from the 0.1 recommendation that is in the report. Let's get the spaces there. They will be utilised, they will be fully utilised, and we can assure that the residents can have some peace of mind. Let's be realistic. The students come into student accommodation, they come and go, sometimes less than 6 months, but the residents are there for life, and a lot of them have been there for decades. Let's ensure that we keep our streets free for the residents to use and for transitional parking for students that may be attending classes. Certainly not for the residents of the accommodation. Thank you.
Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, we've seen that over time, and particularly since the first policy was formed, there's been a huge growth in our education institutions, student population and demand in terms of access to affordable housing in the area. The education sector is one of our strongest and most vital in our economy, and Whitehorse is very fortunate to have two renowned educational institutions in our municipality, in Deakin University and Box Hill Institute. So with the growth in student population and subsequently housing requirements, we've also seen, unfortunately, a prevalence in parking issues. And this is one of the key issues that we've experienced in the past and are currently experiencing, and this is also reflected in the current survey that was recently undertaken. The recent study also showed, and Councillor Ellis had touched upon this, in terms of students actually owning cars, more cars than as previously anticipated, and that car ownership generally exceeded the level of parking on site in connection with student accommodation facility. I think in an ideal world, people would be carpooling and car sharing or using other modes of transport, and I'm certainly an advocate for the use of more public transport and or walking, cycling. But the reality is that people still need to see the need of owning and driving their own cars. The results in the study demonstrates that there needs to be a greater supply of parking spaces in accommodation facilities, and the proposed amendment and alternate will strike a better balance between supply versus demand. I personally would have been happy to keep sort of point B at a similar rate to point A, but I do note that there does need to be an increase compared to our original policy in terms of parking in both the Metropolitan Activity Centre and major activity areas, and I think certainly that this would strike a great balance, as mentioned before, between what is required, and hopefully will also alleviate some of the parking woes in and around student accommodation. So I urge my fellow councillors to support this alternate. Thank you.
Any speakers against the motion? Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, these are maximum values that, these are minimum requirements. They're not maximum requirements. And if the numbers are wrong, the market will need to adjust. But the figures that are in the report come from extensive research in this space. And the figures were such for a reason. And it's actually not, I'm not sure that it's quite true to talk about the number of cars for young people. My son is a Deakin student, and they have one car between three at a unit, and so it's not an apartment, and it actually has provision for 2 spaces in where they're living. But the thing is, with regards to the figures that Councillor Ellis was quoting in terms of the car ownership, that's as a result of the survey that's part of the report, and that's ownership across the board. That's not ownership of a car for people living in student accommodation. That's living with mum and dad, living in the outer suburbs, in houses, on farms, wherever it may be. In terms of our major activity centres, we have a discounted car parking rate for Box Hill and the like, because we're actually trying to discourage cars in the centre of Box Hill. We're not trying to fill Box Hill up with cars. There is excellent public transport from Box Hill, and in terms of Deakin University, which was mentioned, there is an express bus to Box Hill in addition to the tram. So there are public transport options, but certainly for people in Box Hill, there are plenty of transport options. There are trams, buses and trains, and we don't want to fill up Box Hill with cars. So, councillors, I think that there is some sensibility about the rates that are in the report, which is 0.1 for metropolitan activity centres such as Box Hill, and 0.25 for major activity centres. In conclusion, amongst young people, car ownership is falling. People are leaving to later in life getting their licence, and they are not tying up the money in cars as they did in previous generations. So, councillors, I think our policy needs to be adept to that, and I'd ask you to support the report as before us, not the alternative.
Any speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Barker.
Thanks very much, Mayor, and I thank Councillor Ellis, and I'd encourage all councillors to support this alternative amendment, or this amendment, because alternate. And I congratulate the officers and the consultants, because they didn't just look at the paper, they went out and actually studied the site. And I know that's something that frustrates people in our community, because they think the council doesn't actually get down and look at it. In this instance, our consultants examined those parking sites around Box Hill Central in the particular focus where these deliberative accommodation facilities are. Councillor Liu and I and Councillor Ellis, we actually go and see these things too, because if you go to the Bruce Street car park at 4:30 in the morning, guess what? 85% occupancy. Why is that, Mayor? Because they finish their Uber shifts, they've got their car, they park it there, and they've got to, that's where they keep their cars. Cars for a university student, and it's not just students that live up a whoop whoop, but rather students are living in these dedicated accommodation. That's what it's about, is the dedicated accommodation. And we're not talking about just a house on the open market. And again, the report covers that with some detail. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say that, because a car, whether people like it or not, provides a university student, particularly our very valued international students, an opportunity to have some employment so they can have a quality of life. And again, we want outcomes where our university students aren't walking 500 metres in the middle of the night, cross parklands, down dark lanes to get home, because that's the only place they can find a car park. This is about a quality of life for our students. It's about enabling them to actually get a part-time job or a job with a disruptor like an Uber. So, councillors, please, this is a good outcome. It is a massive issue. If you vote against this, you say, oh no, student parking's not an issue in Box Hill or around Deakin. And let me tell you, it is. All you need to do is open your eyes and walk those streets, walk those car parks very early in the morning, very late at night, and you'll see it's a major issue. I congratulate Councillor Ellis for bringing this to us and recommend it all to you.
Any speakers against the motion? Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Car parking is certainly an issue not just with students, but for all of us. And I would say that as councillors, we have a responsibility to set policies that will enable good outcomes in the future, and not just knee-jerk reactions for things that might be of some concern at the moment. Councillor Munro did actually mention, and I agree with him, that private car ownership is dramatically falling, especially amongst younger people for a variety of reasons. I'm a senior citizen, and certainly when I was growing up, owning a car was a rite of passage. Well, that was a long time ago. Nowadays, young people are not wedded to the idea of having a private car, but they are wedded to the idea of being able to be able to move easily from point A to point B. And this is why we have the rise of car share, Uber type facilities for people to be able to move from point A to point B. Certainly public transport has some shortcomings, but all the strategies around Melbourne are to improve public transport in the very near term. So, councillors, it's important, I think, that we look for the longer term rather than just a short-term fix. So, private vehicle ownership, with private vehicles, they're only used about 5% of the time. The other time they're sitting in a car park spot. So, you could say it's not very efficient use of a vehicle that's only being used for 5% of the time. We need to have transportation that's able to move with the times. So, councillors, let's look at the long-term fix for these sorts of things and promote the use of public transport, car share, Uber-type services, etc., rather than the quick fix that we're considering with this particular alternative. Thank you.
Seeker speaker against the motion. In favour of the motion.
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mayor. So I support this predominantly the reasons that Councillor Ellis has said, basically that car ownership is very much still a thing. Students still own cars. They're still getting their licences, they always did, and going out wanting independence and cars. And I'm sorry, I don't agree with Councillor Bennett when he says that, that they're moving away from car ownership in big numbers and just using public transport. So that's just not true. The fact is Melbourne is car dependent, and it will be for some time, not because of not because of the number of car spaces around the place. I mean, we're dealing with symptoms and causes. We can deal with symptoms all we like, but the cause of Melbourne's car dependency isn't related to this. The Melbourne's car dependency is due to state government planning for the last 40 or 50 years, and the fact that we're quite happy to build more and more roads, and just Vic Roads is completely out of control. We are importing, piece by piece, a failed transport model from effectively like somewhere like Los Angeles. If we want to see where Melbourne will be in however many years, that's what we're playing catch up with Los Angeles and their traffic problems. If we want to end up with those, this motion really just accepts the fact that there are far wider issues here, far wider causes than any one local council can influence. It's really a state government and federal government issue about the lack of investment in public transport. If we want to get serious about providing alternatives to cars and roads, we've got to actually invest in public transport equally as much as we're investing in roads. But we look at the North East Link. The plan is both major parties now, Labor and Liberal, are in lockstep. They're going to build option A, which will completely destroy
Councillor Stannard, I'll call a point of order, even though Councillor Munro's already pressed his button. Please contain your speech to the motion at hand. The North East Link is off topic. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Mayor, the issues here are car-dependent Melbourne, and the fact that we're not investing enough in public transport, the fact that Doncaster Rail will be killed as a result of state government planning, poor planning policy, and that's the cause, not how many car spaces we provide. We don't provide these car spaces. They'll just end up shifting the problem onto local streets, and it will be our problem, but our residents' problem, because we're not providing enough car spaces.
Thank you. I'll ask for a speaker against the motion. Any further speakers in favour of the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Masood.
Thank you. I appreciate what Councillor Bennett said. I agree we should be trying to move away from cars. But let's look at the cycle of our lives. When students are studying, and I can use an example of someone I know well, studying at Deakin, working out at Knox, full-time job at Narre Warren, and coaching basketball and travelling lots of kilometres, okay? And that's a student who is trying to complete studies, work, earn money, etc. The reality is, when we look at what a lot of students do for employment, they're often in hospitality and they're working at night, and it is not practical to get transport back home late at night. So sometimes they do need to use cars. It's actually as we get older and perhaps we've got a regular job travelling from home, yes, then we can get public transport to work, and we might be able to, with our partner, reduce to one car. But for many students, they're going in lots of directions and they do need a vehicle to do it and to feel safe. And therefore, I understand that there is a need for car parking. And I also understand that we've had a lot of residents living in the area for a long time, not wanting to lose their street space for cars because they want to still have visitors, etc. So we need to try and look at how to protect it. And we may be well in a transition for the next 20 years until society changes and there is less use of vehicles, etc. But right now there is a problem, and I don't think we should put our head in the sand. We should say, well, look, there's a problem, let's set some ratios that work better for the community, and thus I support this motion of Councillor Ellis's, and I do think that I also absolutely would support less use of cars and encourage public transport. But sometimes you have to look at what's the real demographic and what are they actually doing at that stage in their life, and at that stage in their life they need often transport outside of the public transport sector. Thank you.
Seek a speaker against the motion. Seek a speaker in favour of the motion. I'll give Councillor Ellis a right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I I agree with Councillor Bennett. We should be catching public transport more. In an ideal world, that would be happening. But the reality is Melbourne isn't ready for that. Other countries overseas have got great public transport networks which are well utilised. We don't. We have spokes in a wheel that take us out to Craigieburn, etc. But no way can you link across from places. Rowville's a perfect example, which I know well. There's no public transport there. There may be a bus that runs during the day. They have to have cars. When their children are teenagers, they will have cars. There is no way. A lot of these students do have jobs, as been mentioned. They need to be able to go to their job, which may well be in Rowville. It may well be in Ferntree Gully. It could be anywhere. The reality is that we've got the students with cars. Possibly in 10 years' time, when we do a revamp of this, the situation will have changed. We may have a better public transport system, and that would sort of obviate the need for the parking spaces. But meanwhile, we need them. We shouldn't have this as a burden on the residents. It shouldn't be a situation where even students don't know where to park their car when they come home late at night from working. We need on-site parking on the student accommodation. The argument's been made that this will deter developers from doing any more. It's a lucrative business. I don't think it's going to deter them one bit. Thank you.
I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion's carried.
Division.
Division has been called. Those in favour? Councillor Massoud, Councillor Stennett, Councillor Cutts, Councillor Davenport, Councillor Barker, Councillor Liu, Councillor Ellis. Against? Councillor Munro, Councillor Bennett. Declare the motion carried. 9.1.3 Tender Evaluation Report, Road Improvements in Lynham Street, Laurel Grove North and Boongarry Avenue, Blackburn. I seek a mover.
So moved.
Councillor Munro moved. To seek a seconder.
Happy to second.
Councillor Massoud seconded. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, I'm delighted this report is before Council tonight. It has taken a long time to come before Council from when the road association that looks after those streets approached then Councillor Pemberton and I because the insurance premiums they were paying I think doubled or tripled overnight, and they were finding it increasingly difficult to maintain these roads. These are delightful streets, and we've had a fair bit of discussion about urban forests and the importance of vegetation. There is a lot of vegetation on the road reserve, on the verges of the roads that is important to the community there, that needs to be maintained and will be maintained. The situation with these roads are they are private roads, and they were never built and handed over to council, and this report and the special charge scheme where the residents will make a contribution will address that situation. There have been a number of iterations to get to this point. We did look at maintaining these roads and charging the residents on an annual basis to maintain that. But because of the complexity of the roads, it actually was more cost effective eventually to charge the residents the amount as set out in the report, and it varies as to how much a resident pays depending on their the amount of the street that their property covers and whether they're a corner block, etc. Because if they're on the corner, they may enjoy the streets that may already be made and are contributing to council in that way. But these were unique streets and caused a significant challenge, because normally council has a standard in terms of road width, road depth, the amount of drainage that's required. Usually the drains are on the outside of the road, and in this case, if we had to put our standard road construction through these streets, it would have meant most of the vegetation would come out. These are streets that don't have any footpaths. They're more like country lanes. They meander through a very special and unique part of Blackburn. So basically, the drainage, council will pick up some of the responsibility for the drainage. We'll actually drain down the middle of the roads and protect the verges, and have gone out to market and have a tenderer as detailed in the report, and that's the report is recommending the tenderer that is in the report, and also it sets about the process of charging the residents for the special charge will be a consequence of that. So the residents are contributing most of the funds to the road reconstruction. I think, without seeing the figures in front of me, around $600,000 for around $800,000 project. Council will contribute some of the cost for some of the drainage, and we will set up the special charge scheme where residents will pay through their rates over time to pay council for that capital work. So it is a great outcome, because instead of the local residents trying to get money from their neighbours to do the road repairs, it will be done on their behalf by council, or they will contribute, and council will take responsibility for maintenance of the trees along the corridor, maintenance of the roads, any street sweeping, any drainage issues, and so it's a great outcome. I do commend officers, because it was a complex legal and planning situation. There was a fair bit of consultation with council's legal representatives because of the unique nature of these streets and the different construction standards of road that needed to be deployed. So I congratulate everyone's effort to get to this point, and I'm sure the residents of those streets will be most pleased. I hope you support the motion.
Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. As explained by Councillor Munro, this project has been going on for a long time, since before I was even on council, and I've been here for just on 6 years. So a lot of discussion, a number of consultations, etc., and finally the residents have got to a point where there is support for this to go ahead. And I have to say, as a new councillor, it was always very interesting to learn about the unconstructed roads and the history of how they occurred, etc. But I think from a practical perspective, as they've been around for a while, I guess. We're in more modern times. New people come and buy properties. Perhaps some people have lived in their homes for about 50 years, but we're starting to see some turnover. And as you get new residents into these unconstructed roads, it becomes quite confusing, because they just think it's a normal road and they don't need to do anything, and there seems to be lots of confusion. So I think, although it's taken a long time, it is a good point to get to. I believe that this is a very sensitive area, and so the special needs of this area will be well looked after by council, and I think this is a good outcome for all. The residents will no longer have to try to manage it themselves and have meetings together and sort out what they're doing. At least council can now look after it, but they are their contribution basically is just like when you're buying a new property, where part of what you pay for is for the construction of roads, and so they're kind of doing a bit of a catch-up. That's why they make a bit of a contribution now, but then council can look after it for them, and I think it'll be much easier, and the area will be maintained appropriately. I ask councillors to support this motion also.
Seek a speaker against the motion. Seek a speaker in favour of the motion. Given that there's been no speakers either for or against, I propose to put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.1.4 Laneway 302 Declaration of Road required for public use to be open to public traffic. I seek a mover.
So moved.
I seek a seconder.
Happy to second.
Councillor Masood. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, many decades ago, the fish and chip shop on Canterbury Road, diagonally opposite McDonald's, which is a landmark most people would recognise, came into operation, and it's been owned. It's been a family business for many years. In fact, the owner, I believe, is overseas, but family members run the fish and chip shop and have been there a long time, and I've occasionally dined there, if you call that. perhaps more takeaway than dining there. But there is a table, and they do have the Whitehorse Leader newspaper, usually several weeks old. So there is a bit of reading for a councillor while they're waiting for their fish and chips, etc. But what had happened over time is that there was a laneway that was a public road at the side of this property, and the people occupying the building, the owners of the building, they decided to fence off a fairly large part of the laneway. Cars could still get through, but they basically turned it into a car park for their business, and there's a tree planted there, so it actually gives you an indication that it has been there for quite some time. But this laneway never ceased to be a roadway. And so council has taken legal advice in terms of our position. There are adjoining commercial properties that are on Canterbury Road and Lawrence Street, and what happens is from time to time cars park in a way that, because this fenced off area is there, it ends up blocking the other part of the laneway and the legitimate access by the businesses in those dwellings on the corner of Canterbury Road and Lawrence Street in getting into their properties off Canterbury Road. So, as I said, it's fairly straightforward that we seek to reopen this land as a public roadway, and the occupier of that land will be required to give that land up. But suffice to say that for the 4 or 5 decades, they've actually had the free use of land that didn't belong to them in the first instance, and have been able to benefit from that. But I think it is appropriate that it be returned to a roadway with cognizance of all of the owners of all of the retail premises that are in that precinct. I'd ask councillors to support the motion.
Councillor Masood.
Yeah, there's not a lot more to say. I think there was consultation, and there was clearly a need for access using that laneway for vehicles to be turning and getting in and out. And given that the road or laneway, designated as a road, is still on a road plan of subdivision that shows that it's still actually set aside and in the control of council, given the need by the community, I think it's appropriate that it gets returned to allowing complete access through the laneway, and I think all the businesses there will benefit. So I encourage everybody to support this motion.
Call for a speaker against the motion. Call for a speaker in favour of the motion. There being no speakers, I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.2 infrastructure, 9.2.1 urban forest strategy. I seek a mover.
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Masood moved. I seek a seconder.
Happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts seconded. Councillor Masood.
Well, the urban forest strategy is actually relating to trees and vegetation on council land. So we're not talking about private land. We should be clear that we're talking about council land. And we as a council have committed to the sustainable management of trees and vegetation within our municipality. This interim urban forest strategy, urban forest policy and tree management plan outline the steps that council will take over the next 2 years in order to progress that commitment that we have made. As you would have realised earlier this evening, I made some statements about how much the community value the trees and vegetation. They are very precious to our community. The benefits include social, environmental, economic and health and wellbeing aspects. A thriving urban forest will act to reduce the urban heat island effect, which is a significant threat to the health and wellbeing of residents. It keeps us essentially a bit cooler. To capitalise on these benefits, certain criteria, however, must be met, which include a canopy cover of at least 30%, an appropriate level of diversity in species resulting in resilience against threats. So that provides all the biolinks, etc., and promotes biodiversity. adequate protection of trees, and appropriate social conditions to encourage the community to plant and look after trees. Well, many of us were there for the National Tree Planting Day recently, and we saw what a buzz the community were having, all coming together to do some of that activity in a parkland. So it certainly does have social conditions which are a benefit to our community. It is essential, though, that we collect and analyse data on composition, age, health and other criteria. We need to know about our urban forest effectively. Then the data modelling can occur, which will allow for strategic management and maintenance of council's tree population into the future. We do need to have a scientific approach to this interim urban forest strategy. Increasing tree planting efforts will improve the protection of existing trees, and I would like to note that in the agenda it actually says improving the protection of exiting trees, and I think it's a typo. Improving the health, diversity and resilience of the urban forest, and improving and increasing community engagement. This motion is about an interim strategy, and public consultation will be carried out in the development of the final strategy. Financial implications are that this is funded for the 2018-19 financial year, and so this will get us to get started, I guess, and then once we realise what else is required, that can be costed and presented to Council as a new budget initiative as part of the future budget processes. Thank you.
Councillor Cutts.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The green and leafy character of the City of Whitehorse is one of the main reasons why residents love living where we live, and it's true of myself, in fact. The City of Whitehorse's vision is that we aspire to be a healthy, vibrant, prosperous and sustainable community. And in fact, we aspire to be one of the most livable and sustainable municipalities in Melbourne, and recognised for the quality of our open spaces and natural environment. One of our strategic goals is to continue to sustainably manage, enhance and increase trees and vegetation in Council's streetscapes, parks and gardens, with species that enhance neighbourhood character, support biodiversity and are adaptable to a changing climate. This interim urban forest strategy outlines the key targets, actions and principles that will assist in the realisation of these commitments to which Council has committed. The urban forest strategy is supported by the urban forest policy, which is in the documentation here, which guides how trees will be managed in the urban environment. The strategy also serves as an educational tool to assist residents to understand the vision, policies and actions relating to our tree population. I would encourage, if anyone has got the time to read these strategies and policies to get a real understanding of what we're trying to do here at Whitehorse, because I think this is a really critical document. And I know, and I'm one of the Springfield Ward councillors that is responsible for this area, along with my colleague Councillor Stennett, in Nunawading and Mitcham, is that we consistently get questions about trees. People are very passionate about trees. And for us to move ahead, we need to have this goal by 2030, which is one of our commitments, to have a tree canopy of 30%. At the moment, as we would be all very aware, we're getting increasing numbers of applications for new developments, cutting down trees and so on and so forth. And this is in part why this has actually come here. As Councillor Masood mentioned before, there are many reasons why we want to increase our urban forest strategy, and some of them obviously have been mentioned by Councillor Masood in terms of the heat island effect. Shade, it's been proven, and I think I've read it here, is that we've got something like 20 degrees difference if you're in the shade versus you're out in the sunshine. So it actually assists economically as well in terms of the less use of our air conditioners in summer. Obviously, birds nest in there in the summer months as well. We've got habitat for animals. We've got softening building bulk with the numbers of developments going up. So we've got a whole range of reasons why we want to support our urban forest strategy here. And that's all I will say. Thank you very much.
Call for a speaker against the motion. Call for the speaker in favour of the motion. Being no speakers either for and against, propose to put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. (9.2.2) Tender Evaluation Report, Construction of Nunawading Community Hub. I seek a mover.
Mayor, I'm proposing to move an alternative.
An alternative has been sought by Councillor Stennett. Can I have the alternate displayed? Councillor Stennett, can you please briefly describe the alternate?
So the alternate motion, I suppose how it's different to the original motion is really noting the shortlisted tenderers all of them exceed the proposed project budget, and we're writing to those three shortlisted tenderers to invite a best and final offer, and then receive a further report from council, as opposed to the original report. The recommendation was to appoint one of the tenderers and seek some additional funding.
Thank you. I seek a seconder for the alternate.
Be to second, Mayor.
Councillor Cutts. Councillor Stennett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I've outlined the original recommendation was to appoint one of the tenderers. Council has gone through quite a comprehensive project. Obviously, this is something that's been on Council's books for a couple of years. We've been planning since really the purchase of the primary school, the Nunawading Primary School in 2015, to build the Nunawading Community Hub on that site. And we've gone through a process of an expression of interest, shortlisting, inviting builders to tender for the project, and going through a panel process, quite a comprehensive process, a number of criteria. The tenders evaluated against about 16 or 17 different criteria. They're outlined in the original report on page 52. The major issue here is all of the tenderers have put forward a price that exceeds the proposed project budget, which was $28 million. So that's why in the original report it wanted to approve an additional $2.3 million in funding over the approved budget to accommodate the new costs, largely associated with the existing heritage building and the incorporation of the environmentally sustainable design components that weren't included in the original budget. And you'll note on page 55 of the original budget comparison between Silver Grove budget and the Hub project budget, those line items there, the heritage building and the ESD components weren't included, and they are now in the new budget. So the council, consistent with our procurement policy and trying to achieve best value for money, we're seeking to invite a best and final offer from the three shortlisted tenderers, going back to them and seeing whether they can better their price, so we can construct this Nunawading Community Hub, along with the restoring the heritage building and the ESD components to achieve a 5-star Green Star rating, but within or at least closer to the $28 million budget that was originally approved. So this is an important project, and of course council was going to construct this building on the original Silver Grove site next to Nunawading Station. Of course, made a different decision when we became aware that the state government wanted to sell off the Nunawading Primary School, and we were able to obtain quite a sizable discount of $6 million to purchase that land, and at the time, that discount, as I understand, was contingent on council using the land for community use, and the use nominated was the construction of the new Nunawading Community Hub. Council's gone through a business case already. It's gone through its budget, so we're getting to the, if you like, the pointy end of this in terms of appointing builders, and looking forward to the Nunawading Community Hub being built in the next year or so, couple of years.
Call upon Councillor Cutts.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Stennett. I think you've outlined that very well, so I might just go a little bit into more the history of this. The land was purchased in 2015 at a cost of $6 million. It was more than that, but we were able to negotiate with the state government to get it for that figure, and as Councillor Stennett indicated, there had to be a community use for the land. We're talking about the Nunawading Primary School site, which is just down here, Springvale Road, and just a little down from Springvale Road on the western side. It was built in 1927, the Nunawading Primary School, and I used to live quite near it. My neighbours actually attended there, but then it was actually closed for a number of years and it sat there vacant and was horribly vandalised. Council has declared that the primary school building, the main one, is a historic building and is now on the heritage list, and that will be retained and done up for some of the users of the Silver Grove site. I think the youth counselling will be located in there. We're hoping that construction will start later this year, and the new facility will be landscaped and linked to Tunstall Park, including a bike path, community barbecue facilities and informal recreation areas. And if this obviously is accepted down the track, this will be our first 5-star Green Star rated building in Whitehorse, which will be very exciting. There are a number of groups that will be accommodated in the new community hub, and most of these will be coming across from the Silver Grove site, which is near Nunawading Station. They include U3A, which is about 2,000 users who go to the various U3A courses that they run. Each, as I mentioned, youth counselling service, Meals on Wheels will be operating out of the Nunawading Community Hub. We've got a group called the Nunawading and District Laboratory Club, which is gemstone cutting, Whitehorse Life Activities, which is for elderly people. They'll have a ballroom dancing. And then we've got a number of sporting clubs, Blackburn Vikings basketball, social badminton, Thornburn Ladies badminton. We've got a fencing club. We've got the Whitehorse Arts Association and Pottery Group and Arts Nunawading, Chinese Women's Association and Fitness and Balance Group. And there may be some room, when it's all settled down, to offer availability to other groups who might wish to use the beautiful services provided at the Nunawading Community Hub. So we're very excited about this, and we will note that with regards to the actual recommendation, which is, as Councillor Stennett indicated, slightly different from the one that's printed, we now will move to asking the tenderers to propose a best and final offer, and for that to be then addressed further down the track. Thank you, Mayor.
Seek a speaker against the motion. I seek a speaker in favour of the motion.
Yes, Mayor.
Councillor Barker.
Well, thanks very much, Mayor. I'd encourage all councillors to support this, and I really hope the shortlisted tenderers are listening, because I would really encourage them to forensically examine their costs, because this council is an incredibly financially disciplined one. I'd encourage our shortlist. You've made the shortlist. You've now been invited to make a FABO or a BAFO, whatever industry you come from, best and final offer, final and best offer, and get very focused on the value engineering in this project. Because at Whitehorse Council, we want to work long term with our those that we contract with, and we want to build long-term relationships with the very best and the very most efficient operators. Because we've got a significant pipeline of work, very significant infrastructure, Mr Mayor. And I would remind the shortlisted tenderers that as the commercial residential property market cools, and your concrete fixers and your crane operators are thinking about where's their next job, guess who's going to have the work for you, shortlisted contractors? City of Whitehorse. The City of Whitehorse is going to have a pipeline of building work when there's no commercial, apartments. That school cooled down. Who's going to have the work? City of Whitehorse is going to have it. So I'd encourage these contractors to get very, very focused on giving us a great price. And I would once again, you know, there's absolutely no, and again, Mayor, we'll be looking into the future is measuring people and including that in our tender processes, the demonstrated local performance, demonstrated performance on our projects. You know, if you win this job, you'll get to know the City of Whitehorse, our people and the way that we do things. So it's a very valued piece of business for whoever's successful. And I'd encourage all councillors to support this, and I'd encourage the tenderers, the shortlist, please give us a great price. Let's do it together. Thank you, Mayor.
Seek a speaker against the motion. Seek a speaker in favour of the motion. Seek any further speakers. There being no speakers against the motion, there's no right of reply. I'm going to put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.3.1, in principle approval of the 2017-18 annual financial statements and performance statement. I seek a mover.
Happy to move.
Councillor Stennett moved. I seek a seconder.
Happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Masood seconded. Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this report's about the Council giving its in-principle approval of the 2017-18 annual financial statements and performance statements. Why that's required is because it forms part of our financial statements and performance statements form part of our annual report, which we need to complete and forward to the Minister for Local Government by the 30th of September. These statements have been audited but need to be approved by Council in principle before we submit it to the Minister. Now, so these two particular parts of the annual report are very important. They detail the financial performance and strategic performance and the financial reporting of Council. The financial reports include the standard reports such as the income statement, the balance sheet, cash flow statements, changes of equity, capital works. The capital works have changed their format in the last couple of years. Councillors a couple of years ago may recall a different format where we had new and or stay in business and renewal. We now have 4 different categories. We have new, renewal, expansion and upgrade. Most of our capital works are in the renewal section, $29.4 million in that section out of a total of $35.7 million in the last financial year. The performance statements cover things like sustainable capacity, service performance indicators and financial performance indicators. What these reports show is that we are able to invest in high quality infrastructure. We are able to deliver high quality services with a growing population, with limited grant funding and in a rate capping environment. We have a healthy surplus of $37.8 million, which will contribute to capital works in the future and reducing any liabilities we have. We are in a fantastic financial position, and that is really no accident. That's been over the last 10 or so years. Council has worked its way from one of the least sustainable councils to one of the most sustainable councils in the state. The Victorian Auditor General Office, when they produce their report, I've got absolutely no doubt they'll audit every council. They'll audit Whitehorse Council as they do every year, and they will have glowing statements to say about Whitehorse Council in that report, about our ability to fund projects and deliver services and quite efficiently compared to other councils in the state. So basically where we are is giving in principle approval to these financial statements and performance statements. once that happens, then myself and Councillor Masood and the Chief Executive Officer will be authorised to sign those statements. They will be forwarded to the Minister for Local Government as part of the annual report by the 30th of September. And then our annual report process will be complete after that. So I look forward to seeing the results made public.
Call upon Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councillor Stennett has covered most of it. Just for clarity, perhaps for those who are listening or in the gallery, the Victorian Auditor General conducted the final phase of the audit process in early August this year, or this month, and in conjunction with the audit, they require copies of council resolutions to authorise the signing and approval of, in principle, of the statements. So we need to do this motion this evening in principle approval, and of course, as Councillor Stennett said, it then goes to the Minister, and then ultimately, once it is all sent to the Minister, it can then be put out for public exhibition of the financial statements. So the public can look forward to, in the near future, getting access to seeing how well we are actually performing as a council. And I think at this point I'd just like to acknowledge that this morning when we did have our meeting and the Auditor General representatives were there, it was very clear that a very good job has been done by officers, and I think there is to be some congratulations to the people that are managing all those projects and making sure we do it. I think we've got a good news story that we'll be able to see very soon. Thank you.
I seek a speaker against the motion. Seek a speaker in favour of the motion. Being no further speakers, I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.3.2 Supplementary Valuation Quarterly Report, 1 April 2018 to 30th of June 2018. I seek a mover.
Happy to move.
Councillor Ellis moved. I seek a seconder.
Second.
Councillor Bennett seconded. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is something that we conduct quarterly, the supplementary valuation, and it's really in the interest of equity to ensure that the homeowners that have had their properties for a whole 12 months are not the ones that are bearing the burden for those that may have done amendments to, extensions or rebuilds during the previous period. So this is a legal requirement under the state government, and on this instance, our CIV has increased to over $8 million. It hasn't necessarily given that much in rates. I think we've ended up with 5,709 for this quarter. It'd be rather nice if the other came our way. But this is something we do quarterly and will continue to do quarterly. As I mentioned, it's a legislative requirement, but it does ensure equity across the municipality. Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis, for that. There's nothing really further to add, although I did note that as far as site values in the municipality, we're now over the 50 billion mark, so that's the value of the site that we base our rates on. So the figure's over 50 billion, which is a bit of a mind-blowing figure. It just goes to show how valuable land is within the suburbs of Melbourne.
Seek a speaker against the motion. I seek a speaker in favour of the motion. Being no speakers either for and against, I'm going to put the motion. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.3.3 Adoption of Instrument of Appointment and Authorisation under the Planning and Environment Act 1987. I seek a mover.
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Liu moved. I seek a seconder.
Happy to second.
Councillor Ellis seconded. Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, this is just procedural in terms of appointing two officers, Elvio Ponza and Gert Bothmer, as part of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. So happy to support this appointment, and hope my fellow councillors support this as well. Thank you.
Councillor Ellis.
I think Councillor Liu summed it up very concisely. Thank you.
Any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. 9.3.4 Delegated Decisions, June 2018. I seek a mover.
So moved, Mayor.
Councillor Barker moved. Seek a seconder.
Happy to second.
Councillor Ellis seconded. Councillor Barker.
Thanks, Mayor. Delegated decisions are procedural as well. This talks about the decisions that officers make under delegation in terms of planning and environment, parking restrictions. I urge you all to support it. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Ellis.
What can I say? Councillor Barker covered it very well. Thank you.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Any speakers in favour of the motion? Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. We'll now move on to item 10, reports from delegates, special committee recommendations and assembly of councillor records. 10.1, reports by delegates. Reminder to councillors that this is only delegates that you have been appointed by council or are delegates to. I'm going to start with Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Affordable Housing Alliance, as you know, we're one of 6 municipalities involved in that, and I'm currently the chairperson. We've launched our election campaign. The last, I think, Thursday in July, we've got a campaign called Zone In, www.zonein.net.au. And as a result of this being launched, letters went out to ministers, shadow ministers, and assorted MPs in the eastern region that covered our 6 municipalities. And we've had an amazing response. We're knocking them back. It's been incredible. And I'll be in Parliament House on Thursday afternoon to meet with one of the ministers and also with one of the MPs shortly afterwards. So we're pushing the cause. We're letting all the ministers and MPs know that there's a dire shortage of social housing in the eastern region. Very much so. It has been neglected for a long time. So we're hoping that our campaign's going to resonate. Certainly has so far. We're getting a good response, but we want to see that come into money and more affordable housing and some legislative changes. So hopefully that will eventually come. Thank you.
I go to Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a number of items to report, and I'll try to keep it as concise as possible. First, I'd like to start off with the Eastern Alliance for Greenhouse Action. We had a recent meeting on the 2nd of August, and some of the key agenda items that we looked through was in terms of solar savers. Now, Whitehorse Council were obviously very supportive of the first iteration solar savers version 1.0, and that was partly funded through bank loans. Now, EAGR's looking towards looking at the feasibility to see whether or not we could sort of tie that in with council rates and sort of have a council rates loans arrangement. This is probably something that Whitehorse won't be exploring at this stage. And I note that a couple of the other councils are quite keen to explore it, but at this current stage, I don't think we're ready. So that is in regards to solar savers. Now, in terms of power purchasing agreement as well, now this essentially looks at agreements alongside our existing power purchasing contracts, and it really looks at looking at portioning the loads of energy that we use and looking at options for other energy providers to sort of add into the mix. Now, sort of where we stand at Whitehorse is that we were given a deadline. EGA had suggested the end of September to seek any expression of interests in terms of commitment, but we believe that this deadline is a bit too soon, as we need more evaluation just in terms of the required energy mixes to establish for Whitehorse. So we do believe it is a bit too soon for us, and that was stated at the meeting. I just wanted to touch upon two other items quickly. One is in regards to the energy performance contracts. Now, councillors, you would be aware that Whitehorse and Monash had gone to market in terms of energy performance contract procurement. And this combined project is probably one of the largest corporate energy efficiency initiatives in the Australian local government sector. And the scale of this initiative does pose some human resource challenges for the project partners. So one of the things that EGA is looking at is to potentially look at additional staff to assist EGA's Major Energy Projects Officer as well. So we had a discussion in regards to this, and we're generally supportive of this, and happy to further explore the feasibility of that. Lastly, I'd just like to touch upon just in terms of the cost sharing with major road lights, and this is in regards to Vic Roads and council cost sharing energy efficiency lighting initiatives. And so we've been lobbying very hard with the Minister, and what was proposed that coming up to a state election that the Shadow Minister also be contacted. So an advocacy letter will be sent out to the Shadow Minister in regards to funding for this initiative. Second item I'd like to touch upon is just in terms of the Municipal Early Years Steering Committee, and we had a recent meeting on the 6th of August. So this meeting was to look at the Year 4 action plan. It's quite comprehensive, and a report will be coming to Council very soon, actually, in the next few months. Just wanted to touch base on a couple of key achievements in the past year, including very successful for early years parent information forums. They were very well attended, and we had great feedback as well. In terms of the Flexi Buzz app, we now have 803 Flexi Buzz app subscribers, so that includes a lot of the news and updates around the municipal early years space. The Whitehorse Family Resource Guide, we've got a newly revised and updated version. So 1,000 copies were printed, and a PDF is also available on the corporate website. So this has been extremely popular and hot off the press as well. So make sure that if you know of it, sort of any families, to direct them to the website, or these are also available at a lot of our early learning centres as well. The toy libraries and playgroups have been very successful, and there's been a lot of work, particularly around our cold community, including Chinese playgroups, which has been very, very popular. Immunisation rates in Whitehorse are above the state and regional averages, which is great to see. And our officers and partners are still, working very closely in the Whitehorse Early Years Sector Network, particularly around topics such as family violence and the NDIS, and looking at working with vulnerable families as well. Child-friendly cities is another topic, but I think I will refer that to Councillor Stennett, who's also on the steering committee with me. And finally, the Whitehorse Manningham Regional Library Corporation. We had an internal audit committee meeting last week on the 15th of August. Now, we went through the draft 2017 and 2018 financial accounts, and it was generally supported with some minor updates, and this will be presented to the board very shortly. Vagos also provided a draft closing report, which was generally favourable. There are still a few minor outstanding items that have since been addressed or in the process of being addressed. Just a couple of things in regards to the organisational risk status report. Now, I'm happy to say that generally quite a lot of our operational and strategic elements are quite low in their rating. There are two sort of areas that the corporation have been focusing very heavily on, and that's around financial sustainability and strategic planning. I'm sure that all councillors here are aware that the corporation runs a very tight ship, but we are looking at ways to further, I guess, improve our funding avenues, and that looks at, you know, the library plans, action plans, marketing plans, as well as more advocacy work as well, and also looking at bequest and fundraising policies as well, which was adopted in May 2018. We also did an internal audit report as well, and the auditors provided just a report on particularly around customer service and some of our cash handling procedures, and I'm happy to advise that we have good controls in place. So I think that's it from my end. It was a bit longer than I expected, but there was a lot to report, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Liu, and if there's other councillors on the same committee as Councillor Liu, I'd ask that you only add new topics to the report and not cover old ground if possible. I will now go to Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Mayor. On the 8th of August, I attended the Arts Committee meeting, and I'd like to report that there was an acquisition of the meteor shower, which many may have seen at the recent exhibition of Dean Bowden. It's a very impactful piece, which is like a house with this meteor shower coming. It's very colourful, and it's a really visually appealing piece, Mr. Mayor, and have great application in any number of parts of our organisation. I also note that there's a number of conservation works that are going on, and this is where we preserve, protect and restore pieces of work that do get dirty or damaged over time, particularly public art in some of the gardens. So that's going on. There's a new member joining the committee, James Lynch. He's a deacon curator, very impressive resume, has been appointed to the committee after recent retirement. One of the other really pleasing things to see is always considering the donations that are made to our collection, Mr. Mayor, and one of the very pleasing ones that I can report we accepted into our collection, and not all donations are accepted because well, frankly, some things are more artworthy than others, or more in keeping with the collection, was an early Dean Bowden work, and it's really interesting to see the progression of an artist from early in his career to now. And there was also some very interesting suggested exhibition material, and I thank Councillor Cutts for one, which was with quite revealing photographs of women with disabilities, which was great, and some other really interesting suggested exhibitions where artists come to us, and there's some macabrons that have been reimagined, like they're lost in Box Hill, but it's been reimagined with some sort of a modern twist on it. So there's some really interesting things coming through, Mr. Mayor, but I could go on all night, but I won't. Thank you.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, as the delegate to the Eastern Transport Coalition, I attended two meetings in the last cycle. The first one on the 19th of July, where we had Hugh Millichip, who's the General Manager of the Network Development Metro Trains, who presented to us. Some of the takeouts from that, just maybe confirming what we already knew, the Belgrave-Lilydale line is the second busiest train line on the network, but the most congested. Something like 15,000 passengers in the peak hour, the morning and the evening. Evening is is more of a problem because there's constraints with single line sections, age signalling and level crossings. And in the evening peak hour, people tend to want to use that service within a shorter period of time rather than the morning section. An interesting fact that came to light was that timetabling for coordination between buses and trains is handled by the bus operators. So it used to be handled by Public Transport Victoria, but it's now handled by the bus operators. The 16th of August meeting had a presentation by a bus operator, CDC, who are generally based in the western suburbs, but they do have an eastern suburbs service, the number 602, which runs from Chadstone via Surrey Hills to Box Hill. So there were some interesting things that came to light in our part of the world also, that the Southern Metro Partnership are partnering with Ventura for possible on-demand bus services. So this is just a new way of looking at being able to increase patronage to have a more on-demand, so a more efficient way of picking up passengers when required. Also of note that you might know that there's a Metropolitan Transport Forum at the end of this month, 30th of August, at Box Hill Town Hall. So the Eastern Transport Coalition will be there to promote our Commuters Count campaign and to try and get people involved as supporters of that campaign. So I understand that we have MPs David Davis and Samantha Dunn, but also the new state Labor candidate for Box Hill, Peter Hamer, that who will be presenting at that forum. The other delegate position is with the Metropolitan Local Government Waste Forum. That was on the 17th of August. So in this space, very interesting because there's lots of things that are happening in this area. The Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group are assisting councils with the Food Organics, Green Organics program, and as you know, this is incorporating food waste into our green bin. At Whitehorse, we're not quite ready for that. There'll be other councils that will be moving into that space very shortly. There'll also be a regional business case for advanced waste processing that'll be released end of this month. So the point was made that the Food Organics, Green Organics initiative is important, but that won't reach targets alone, that we need energy recovery through waste to energy programs. So that'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next few years. As we might know, also with our yellow bins, with our recycling bin, that contamination is one of the big problems, and basically was one of the reasons that China decided not to accept the sort of recycling that we were trying to export to them. So the Resource Recovery Implementation Plan will focus on reduction of contamination with respect to recycling. Thank you.
Councillor Cutts.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor, with your permission, I would like to speak about the Box Hill Library refurbishment opening as the council delegate to the Library Committee.
That's outside the normal meeting. Outside, so I'll decline to provide permission on this occasion, especially because we've had a substantial report from the other member on the Library Corporation.
All right, thanks, Mayor. Nothing to report. Thank you.
Councillor Stennett.
Yes, thank you. I've got a couple of reports. First report is just the Whitehorse Municipal Early Years Plan, along with Councillor Liu. I attended that meeting on the 6th of August, where we largely discussed the Early Years Plan template and the work done so far, particularly in the year 4 of the plan, and the progress, which will be reported to Council in the future. I think either September or October meeting coming up. In particular, the work on that interested me was the work done on further embedding the child-friendly cities priorities into Council's plans, and particularly in the work that we've done in consulting with with children. Just to remind councillors what a child-friendly city is, it comes from the United Nations Rights of the Child when they developed that in about 1995 or 6. And it's all about improving the lives of children by realising the rights as articulated by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's a city in which the voices, the needs, the priorities and rights of children are an integral part of the policies and the programs and decision making of a city. And that's something that I've been quite interested in since being elected, in fact, and it's good to see that we're doing some further work on that in our early years plan. And I look forward to that being reported with everything else later this year. The other item is the Whitehorse Reconciliation Action Committee. On the 8th of August, we had most of the meeting taken up by Alicia Wheatley, who is one of the members of that committee from the Department of Health and Human Services. She was talking about the state government's 10-year plan, 2017 to 2027 plan on Aboriginal health, wellbeing and safety. It's called Corin Ballot Jack, which means growing very strong in the Woiwurrung language. It provides an overarching framework for action to improve the health, wellbeing and safety of Aboriginal Victorians now and over the next 10 years. So the purpose of that plan is to realise the Victorian Government's vision for self-determining, healthy and safe Aboriginal people and communities in Victoria. So I found that quite an interesting presentation, and I urge councillors, if they're interested, to have a look at that on the Department of Health website. Just tonight, just the last meeting was the Audit Advisory Committee, which met this afternoon. We discussed in some detail the annual financial statements and performance statements 2017-18, which we've considered tonight on the agenda. We had a representative from the Victorian Auditor General's Office, who are our external auditors, in attendance, and we were able to discuss the final management letter from VAGO, which details the findings of the 2017-18 audit, chaired by our independent auditor, Mike said, and it gave members an opportunity to ask questions about those annual financial statements and performance statements before coming to council. That's all I have. Thanks.
Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. I also attended the Audit Committee this morning with Councillor Stennett, but I won't elaborate. We've had a motion and he's spoken to it. As Chair of the Disability Advisory Committee, we met on the 1st of August. It was an interesting meeting. We got onto a topic that we've not discussed before, and that was about advocacy framework models. And it was interesting because there are a number of different models. For example, there's a citizens advocacy model where volunteers act as a mentor or advisor. There's a family advocacy model where an advocate works closely with families, and that's often used for children, but not often used for adults. Then there's a legal advocacy model used in a legal space. Within council, we work more on a systemic advocacy model and affecting change in attitudes, support services, etc., how we can support the community. And a little bit more discussion went on, but there's actually 10 advocacy service providers in Victoria, and what was of interest, the members of the Disability Advisory Committee, who represent members of the community with a variety of disabilities, discussed how if you're trying to contact an advocacy service provider, there are very long waiting lists, and that you are assessed on needs and urgency, but if you don't go to the right type of advocacy model, that sometimes it extends the time in which you need to wait. So if you know, community members come forward and someone is aware of that, I think you would encourage them to contact officers, and then they can be given direction of perhaps where they could best pursue their needs. There was also of interest in June this year, the Australian Human Rights Commission released a report called A Future Without Violence, and it's 120 pages. It is about violence against those with a disability, and it had some very interesting sections. One of the appendices is a literature review. Anyone who was doing research in that might find that useful. But for those who have an interest in that space, it is freely downloadable, so you could just search for A Future Without Violence and get access to that document. And that's all I've got to report. Thank you.
Councillor Munro.
No report.
I have no report. I seek a motion to receive and note these delegates' reports. Those in favour? Against? Hang on.
Mr Mayor, did you have someone move the motion?
I'm happy to move, Mr Mayor.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Thank you for pulling me up on that. I'll seek a mover for this motion, Councillor Stennett, and a seconder, Councillor Munro. I'll go through a proper process. Any speaker against the motion or in favour of the motion? There being none, I'll put the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. I'll move on to 10.2. Recommendations from the Special Committee of the 13th of August 2018. There were none. So I'll move on to 10.3, Record of Assembly of Councillors. I seek a motion to receive and note the Record of Assembly of Councillors.
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Liu moved.
Happy to second, Mayor.
Councillor Cutt seconded. Is there any discussion? Being none, I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item number 11, reports on conferences and seminars. Councillors, are there any reports on conferences and seminars? And for the purposes of tonight, I will count the Whitehorse Business Group as the Whitehorse Business Week events as a seminar, but I would like councillors to keep the reports as brief as possible and not be repetitive. So I'm going to start with Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I haven't got my notes ready, but I attended the MAV Council Development Weekend at Torquay a couple of weeks ago, and I actually thought it was actually a very good weekend with a very good array of speakers on a number of issues. They certainly had a consultant who is an advisor to them on planning matters, and I think I got a great deal of value out of that. There were some administrative things that I won't bore the gallery with, but were quite beneficial. And I must say I was totally inspired by Anna Mears' story, who broke her back 7 months before the Olympics and went on to win a silver medal. She was the dinner speaker on the Saturday night. I so move my report.
Councillor Masood.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended a forum, Women Leading Change. It was a partnership by women of the Eastern Football League, Eastern Health, VLGA, the AFL, and Women's Health East. And they had 4 guest speakers: Catherine Smith, who's a local resident, played with Blackburn Football Club, and is now in the AFLW, Heidi Victoria, Councillor Marika Graham from Maroondah, and a person who worked at Coles and had risen, I guess, through the ranks. And it was about leadership and how women sometimes question their own ability and don't put their hands up, etc. And so there were 4 very good speakers who presented their stories about how they were able to achieve some leadership in life and go into varying roles. And I think it was extremely good. It was well attended. There were a lot of Whitehorse residents there on the night as well. And it was a successful event. And I think that's all I need to report. Thank you.
Councillor Stennett,
Nothing to report.
Councillor Cutts,
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I also attended the Women Leading Change Forum and concur with Councillor Masood's comments with that, so I won't go into that. I did also on 3rd of August attend a negotiating and influencing capabilities all-day program. It was an excellent day and we looked at 3 key components, which was planning, engaging and deciding for successful collaborative negotiation. And there are a number of key skills that we learnt from that in implementing structured methodologies to negotiate successfully, learn collaborative techniques to achieve meaningful commitments and improve capabilities to manage stress and emotions, both in relationship to ourselves and also to other parties. And it will help all of us, including myself, in increasing my ability to develop and manage relationships, create harmony amongst all stakeholders, and develop and sustain long-term collaborative partnerships and secure successful outcomes in negotiations. So that was excellent. Another one that I'd like to talk about, being the council delegate with Council Liu on the Whitehorse Business Group, I attended the Women in Business Expo and Luncheon with Nova Paris last Wednesday, and I found it quite moving. Nova Paris OAM, as we all probably know, was Australia's first Indigenous woman to win an Olympic gold, and that was in 1996. And she also won the Young Australian of the Year award in 1997. She presents as a very humble, passionate first Australian, very proud of her heritage, and with a desire to make it easier for others to follow in her footsteps. I was really impressed with her candid interview with our CEO, Noeline Duff, who ran that beautifully. It was quite extraordinary. The time just disappeared, but it was almost an hour that she spoke, and it was just such an engaging interview, and it was I really enjoyed that. So that's my contribution. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I also attended the Nova Paris luncheon, and as Councillor Cutt said, it was excellent. Also, another Whitehorse Business Week function was the regional business breakfast, discovering the dynamic transitional economy of Melbourne's East. So that was well attended by a number of councils in the eastern suburbs and well worthwhile. I'd like to make note of a seminar I attended that was run by the Victorian Planning Authority. There's a series of seminars. This was the first one, entitled The Future of Melbourne, Shaping the Inner City. And the guest speaker was Sally Capp, the new Lord Mayor of Melbourne. There was a panel there, Jude Munro, AO, who's the board chair of Vic Planning Authority, and Jim Miller, board chair of Infrastructure Victoria. All very impressive people. I was particularly impressed with Jude Munro. I thought she spoke in an excellent fashion and gave an overall view of what her viewpoint is on planning for Victoria. Sally Capp, though, really encapsulated what her views were about the shaping of Melbourne, and she made note that from her viewpoint, the big difference over many years with Melbourne Central is that people now live there, whereas I can remember the day when you went into the city on a Sunday and there was no one there. It's quite different now, but that's the big difference. So her viewpoint was that people are more important than the built form, that it's people that give the vibrancy to a CBD. Also, she mentioned something that I made note of, that cities are for people and not cars. So she's very strong about that, trying to make Melbourne more livable, and Melbourne lost the mantle of the most livable city just recently to Vienna, but we're number 2 now. But the point that she was making is that it's important that cities are designed for people and not cars. Lots of lessons that can be learned from her, I believe, and I made the point of speaking to her afterwards and mentioning that Box Hill is the second CBD of Melbourne, and that maybe we can learn some lessons from things that the City of Melbourne have achieved and are achieving. So watch this space, something might happen in that area. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Councillor Liu.
Thank you, Mayor. I attended the Victorian Greenhouse Alliance conference on the 20th of July, and it was a really good turnout and had involvement from all the metropolitan greenhouse alliances, as well as some of the regional alliances and networks. There were a number of breakout sessions, and I attended the following panels, including looking at measuring for successful adaptation, and there was a really interesting presentation from some RMIT scientists around improving urban microclimates and working with communities to further the engagement and the scientific aspect of such initiatives. I also attended the session around tackling urban heat islands, which is, we talked about our urban forest strategy just earlier, and Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance actually has quite an interesting project currently with a number of regional and rural councils participating, which looked at proof of concept mapping, and it looked at aspects such as social vulnerability, pedestrian exposure to heat, and looking at prioritising areas in need of cooling. They also looked at the gap analysis of council's strategic and operation contexts regarding heat and recommended some actions in relation to those findings. So what I found interesting was that the data that such a project generates, the main aim is to share that information across all the departments within those councils. So you're not only looking at the planning department, but you're also working very closely with the Parks-wide department, community health. So I found that quite interesting, and I think that there are some lessons to be learned there. The last session that I attended was around creating a climate-ready planning system. So CASB, Council Alliance for a Sustainable Built Environment, presented on that, and they're further advocating and working on better ESD policies across the board, and a real focus on urban ecology. City of Melbourne, as Councillor Bennett had just mentioned, they're starting to do some really fantastic work around green infrastructure in the city. So, I look forward to, in anticipation, to see what they come up with in that space. I also attended a number of Business Week events, and it was another successful Business Week this year, well attended, and a wide range of different topics, and heard a lot of positive feedback from the attendees that attended. So I'd like to say well done and congratulations to our investment and economic development team. They did a fantastic job. And thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like Councillor Munro, I also attended the MAV weekend. First time I've been there in probably 9 years, which was very interesting. They had some excellent speakers, can I say, apart from the keynote speaker on the Saturday night for the dinner, who had us enthralled. I think there wasn't you couldn't drop a pin in the whole room because she was just so entertaining and I guess so inspirational. We also had Craig Rucastle as the last speaker on the Sunday before it all faded away. And what was interesting, and Councillor Munro will probably agree with me, there weren't many people that were lost overnight or in the morning, which often happens at conferences that go into a Sunday. If people check out earlier and they tend to leave. But in this case, the same amount of people that were there the night before were virtually there at lunchtime because he was such a draw card. And oh, is that what it was? But he was very enlightening because I haven't really caught much of his shows, and I guess I will from now on. I'll go and check them out because he was very inspirational. We had a number of speakers, and there was one man called Martin, I've forgotten his name, and he made a comment about Rotterdam, which I've written down because it was very interesting. he said what they did was provide methadone in exchange for cleaning the city, which proved to be highly successful, and the safety in the city increased out of sight. And I thought that was a very interesting comment. Sophie Segafredo from MAV was the one that did the planning session, and I have got a printout. She was looking at phase 1 that has been completed, and she did highlight that on the last Tuesday, there would be, let me get the correct terminology, that VC 148 would be gazetted. Which moves me on to my next seminar, which happened to be Tuesday morning, and the Planning Minister was the keynote speaker at that point in time, the opening of the session, and he in fact did discuss VC 148, and this particular seminar was entitled Affordable Housing. So being the rep for our EAHA, I went there feeling fairly optimistic that the long-awaited inclusion rezoning might be announced. And no, that wasn't to be the case. There were lovely expressions that he used. He was quite convincing in the way he felt that it could work, and he used expressions such as voluntary and negotiate, etc., when it came to getting inclusion rezoning and extra units. He was very positive in that councils can deliver these units by negotiation and voluntary. At a later stage, questions were opened. There was a panel there, and somebody did ask the question, the Minister had long gone by now, of the panel members, that what's happened about inclusion rezoning, and there was a bit of mild applause in the audience, one could say. So it was a very interesting session because you were seeing it from a number of perspectives, including housing providers. So it was really worthwhile. But certainly from an EAHA perspective, we didn't get the announcement that we sort of were hoping for. But there's months ahead and there's next year, and we're not going to be giving up. Thank you.
I attended two Whitehorse Business Week events, Economic and Investment Breakfast and the Melbourne East Regional Breakfast. And I also attended Building a Better Tomorrow Youth Forum on the 16th of August. That was primarily attended by Year 9 students from Box Hill Secondary College and Koonung Secondary College. And given that the Whitehorse Business Week events have already been mentioned, I won't elaborate on those further. The Building a Better Tomorrow Youth Forum was run by the Whitehorse Youth Representative Committee and essentially looked at inclusiveness and a number of other aspects in that regard. And I'm sure that the Whitehorse Youth Representative Committee will report on that in their annual report, so I won't do so tonight. Councillors, I seek a motion to receive and note these reports.
So moved.
Councillor Munro moved. A seconder. Councillor Bennett seconded. Is there any discussion? I'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Item number 12, confidential reports. Councillors, there are 2 items in the confidential reports section this evening, so I seek a motion to go into camera.
So moved.
Councillor Munro moved.
Happy to second.
Councillor Cutt seconded. Is there any discussion? Put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. People in the gallery, at the end of the confidential reports, we will come back, but there will be no topics of business after we do come back, so enjoy your evening, and thank you for all attending this evening.